India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is about to unveil the first ever digital-only budget for financial year 2021-22. This year's Union Budget 2021-22 assumes special significance in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's will be a budget of many firsts. The first time in the history of independent India, the budget papers will not be printed. The Finance Ministry has decided not to print the budget documents in physical form this time amid the pandemic scare. It will be digitally most accessible Union Budget of all time, available online on Union Budget mobile application.
budget.
Now, we are being joined by a very special panel of guests, but first let's go across to Andrew Ferris, the CEO of Ecognosis Advisory. He's joining us from Hong Kong. Andrew, there are many sectors in India that desperately are in need for aid, isn't it? Healthcare sector needs massive backing, so does tourism and hospitality sector, with global travel severely affected. Food and beverage industry needs continued support, with restaurants and bars shut for large parts of last year. The farmers have been staging a protest. What will be the key focus area for the Indian government? Now, government has been pushing for Atmanirbhar Bharat, or a self-reliant India. That is the need, isn't it, going forward?
Well, undoubtedly, the health service sector and the emergency aspect of the coronavirus will take top concern. But I'm afraid this is, in a way, a kind of a one-off in a progressive situation. What is very important, not to be forgotten, because India has made spectacularly good progress on that, was on climate control, because Mr. Modi has announced that India is very likely this year to achieve and surpass her Paris 15 commitments. And it is also very, very near of having 40% of all energy produced by non-fossil fuels, and also has perhaps the most spectacular utilization of both solar and wind energy in providing electricity. This cannot and should not be forgotten. You know, the people in Delhi and in Mumbai that choke every year on the horrible climatic position of India will remember that. Yeah, I agree. There are the farmers, and there are the exporters, and there are the transport sector, and there are the infrastructure sector. There are piles and piles of things. But for me, the climate is something that I think India should take literally a lead in the world. Never mind sending satellites to Mars. That's nonsense. But India taking a lead, an underdeveloped country taking a lead in climate control, superb. Good publicity and, of course, very, very good humanitarian and economic progress.
Absolutely. I know that the world needs to focus on the climate emergency, not just India. The world needs to focus on this climate emergency that is certainly a huge challenge for every global power. But for the common man in the middle of this pandemic, the first thing they need right now is jobs, isn't it? Unemployment figures in India rose by close to 11% from November to December last year. What is the government going to do, or what steps is the government going to do to boost businesses, or to help businesses hire back more people? Close to 35 million people are unemployed in India.
Having brought the good news on the table, the bad news concerns three specific aspects. One is the actual numbers on which all this is based, and expectations that India have actually, the GDP shrunk by about 9.6% in the course of 20, and it is supposedly going to increase by 9.2% in the course of 21. And that is very good news for employment. I'm afraid it misses out a very important point. This enormous rebound from -9 to +9 is on the basis of a very low base. In other words, it is a real figure, but it's not real in actual output, jobs and employment. So we have to keep this in mind. The second point is, of course, the incredibly draconian lockdown that took place nearly a year ago, something like 9 months ago, led to something like, you know, the numbers were absolutely staggering, between 25 to 100 million mobile itinerant workers to lose their jobs and go drift back to the countryside. But I'm afraid this cannot be undone that very quickly. And I'm afraid I'll have to go back to that stupid experiment with the substitution of the rupee note that left a very deep indentation that still reverberates. So yes, the government has a lot of things to do, some of which were completely its own doing. And throughout the last year, whereas even small countries went into steep budget deficits to do something, actually India did very little. I've seen numbers that, taken together what the Reserve Bank of India and what the government itself did, that runs to about 1 to 1.1, 1.2% of the fiscal deficit being, in a sense, reinvented. So yes, they have a lot to do, but a great deal to do.
Absolutely. You know, the world's eyes, Andrew, is it fair to say that the world's eyes will be on India because the IMF has predicted that India will be one of the fastest growing economies in the world post-pandemic. So is the world looking towards India? Is the world looking for India to set a blueprint or a roadmap for other developing nations to follow?
Of the vaccination, and of course poor India has 1.2 billion to vaccinate, and it is absurd to expect that things will happen very, very quickly. But I think the eyes of the world will be to policies that are not knee-jerk, that take very, very good consideration of the available resources, and also continue to maintain the lead of India on the climate side. The obsession with the fiscal deficit is not irrelevant. The fiscal deficit right now is, we're likely to see something like, 7% in the course of 21, and the target is 3%. So we're talking about double plus. But 34 to 35% of all the revenues raised by the Indian government goes to pay interest rates.
Right.
That's absurd. It's completely stupid. It has been like that for years, incidentally. I'm not bringing any news. So the way in which this is going to be paid for is extremely important, because raising the fiscal deficit only continues to take 1/3 of whatever they raise, goes straight into interest rates.
Right. Andrew Ferris, thank you so much for joining us, CEO of Recognisis Advisory. Thank you so much as we look forward to the first ever digital budget in India. We are playing out visuals on the screen of India's Finance Minister, who has just reached the Parliament and will be presenting in just a short while from now. Also joining us in the studio right now is Suman Berry, formerly member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Suman, thank you so much for giving us your time. Welcome to WION. It's not all bad, isn't it? The IMF predicts that next year, post-pandemic, India will emerge as the fastest growing economy, the only global economy, major global economy to grow at a double-digit growth. But what are the demands of the common man? We already discussed unemployment. Are there going to be any steps taken to reduce taxation? Will taxes be lowered? What help is the small businesses, MSMEs, going to get in this budget?
Shobit, this is my first time at WION, and I'm very pleased to be here. Look, I think that growing fast is certainly important. It's important for the world. It's important for India. But the economic survey that came out on Friday, it was very, clear and candid that even so, India will be well behind where it would have been, which is to say we're growing fast because we went down so fast. And so I just want to, before addressing your question, indicate what I'm looking for in the budget. I think the first point is that India, as it were, has suffered probably a higher growth slowdown than most other emerging markets. I heard you ask the previous speaker about this. I think, second, we have to appreciate the complexity of the challenge facing the government, because we are talking about a rebound, which is V-shaped. We're talking about a recovery. But most importantly, we have to lay now the grounds for rebuilding.
Right.
Okay. Now to come to your question about the common man and the MSMEs. Look, I think the strategy of the government, and the correct strategy, has been to say some of what the new economy is going to look like may well mean that some of these MSMEs are no longer viable. I'm talking about businesses rather than individuals. So let us try and do what we can to support individuals while still permitting what economists call adjustment in the economy.
You know, there are thousands and millions of MSMEs in India who employ millions of people.
Yes.
And most of these MSMEs are small businesses. They don't have the capital to sustain large periods of lockdown. And they must have suffered during the lockdown. How is the government going to help them?
Again, I think focusing on the enterprises rather than the employees is a mistake. Okay? I think the point that you made to the previous speaker about unemployment is the important one.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I think what we are looking at, Shobit, is an important budget really from the point of view of employment. Because India's employment problem has been a long-running sore. It only became exposed during the pandemic, partly because of the migrant issue, etc. Right. And so what we need now is not a band-aid, but really to think through what constitutes a healthier employment position.
Right, so as we are getting up for the budget, let's go across to WION's business editor, Sumit, who's joining us with details on how the markets are reacting ahead of the budget. Sumit, over to you.
Well, Shobit, thanks for this, and let's take a look at markets. Since the morning, the markets have been going up. As we see, Sensex is up by over 400 points. Well, clearly there is some expectation building up on account of some announcements that can happen in budget. The challenges are there plenty, but markets are hopeful that government will find some way so that there is something which is given to overall economy. Based on the assumptions, markets are up. So today, the markets are up on the expectations, but this week there's another big event. It's RBI's policy that's going to happen on Friday. So markets are expecting interest rates to, they will not be tinkered with, and that's what is again some relief to markets. Overall, there is generally it happens that the markets close in red on budget day, but if we look over the last 1 year, or we can say the 10 months, well, really there's a big bounce in market. They have doubled. Sensex has doubled from 25,000 to 50,000 marks. So clearly a big boost that has been given to India's stock market. Today also we can see overall the Sensex going up, and there can be some volatility going forward when the markets overall enter and the budget speech is being announced. Then there's a zigzag. Since the morning, Asian markets, Taiwan and China both are in green, other are mixed. So that's how the markets are going to move now. Later on part of the day, they will depend on how European markets open. Back to you, Shobit.
Sumit, thank you so much for getting us those details. We'll keep coming back to you as we can tell our viewers Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has reached the Parliament any moment now. She will present the budget. Also joining us on this broadcast is Amy Casman, South Asia Bureau Chief, Financial Times. Amy, thank you so much for giving us your time. Welcome to WION. Now, India emerged as a reliable destination for foreign investment during the pandemic. The global supply chains were affected and countries pushed to end reliance on China. India emerged as a key alternative. India had the maximum growth in the world as far as FDI in 2020 is concerned, greater than that of China. Countries like United States, UK and Russia had negative FDI growth in 2020. So what's making India such a reliable destination for foreign investors?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, to put the FDI growth numbers in context. India's FDI, the growth comes off a pretty low base. So it's, this increase is significant, but at the same time, it also comes from a fact that, FDI has not been traditionally very, very strong in India. It's also important to remember that most of the robust growth in FDI in India has actually not flown. There has been some pickup in manufacturing investment, but a huge percentage of the FDI growth actually relates to global multinational tech companies investing in Reliance Jio and also in Reliance Retail. So in fact, what has actually happened is multinational companies that are interested in exposure in India have decided that teaming up with Mr. Mukesh Ambani and Reliance is a very smart bet in order to capitalize on what they see as future growth. And so they've all, Mr. Ambani has offloaded significant stakes to companies like Facebook and Google. And so this is that kind of investment. It's a play on the Indian consumer market, and it's a bet that if they team up with him, they'll be able to ride on his coattails and basically kind of have exposure to the Indian consumer market. This is not a massive inflow of the kind of manufacturing investment that India so badly needs in order to generate jobs. Not to say that it's not important and not interesting, but the fact of the matter is that in terms of alternative to China, a lot of investment in terms of companies looking to diversify manufacturing supply chains, a lot of that investment has flowed to places like Vietnam and other places in Southeast Asia, and not as much to India as India would like. But obviously, that is an area where the government is hoping to make an impact and woo a lot of countries and companies to say India is a better bet than China, or for those of you that are looking to diversify your supply chains, please welcome and come look here.
Absolutely. So what steps will the Indian government take to boost more foreign investment? We also spoke about unemployment. That remains the key focus in this budget, isn't it? What was, according to you, did the urban India suffer more, or did rural India suffer more as far as joblessness is concerned during the pandemic?
Look, I think it's quite apparent that the joblessness has been widespread, and to somehow suggest that urban India and rural India are somehow disconnected is kind of false, because we see that in fact they're heavily, heavily connected. And when jobs in cities fell, like when lockdown happened and, jobs disappeared and, factories came shuddering to a halt, all those workers, 140 million of them estimated, many of them are migrants from rural areas, and the rural areas depend on their remittances from the cities. And it's not that, that these two areas are separate. So if jobs in urban areas, disappear and dry up, the impact is felt both in the urban areas and back in the rural areas, where this flow of income is a very important part of many rural households' budgets. And you saw that the result of that was a massive outflow of people from India's cities back to rural areas, and a massive surge in demand for the government's rural job generating scheme, NREGA, which is kind of like an insurance program that gives people in rural areas an opportunity to earn something. So I think, both urban and rural areas have suffered a lot. Jobs are jobs, and it's not like it's only in the jobs are in the cities, but when the jobs in cities and industrial areas dry up, the ripples and repercussions are also felt back home in the most remote rural villages, where people depend on, relatives in the cities to send them money every month. And in many areas, those remittances, internal remittances within India, play a huge portion of rural household budgets.
Absolutely, but according to recent, you're absolutely right, it's absolutely linked the urban economy to the rural economy. But for the first time in recent past, the urban unemployment rate was 8.8%, which is lower than rural unemployment rate of 7.6%. The rural economy needs help. The farmers were also out on the roads. We will also focus on the manufacturing sector, infrastructure sector, the travel, food and business sector, all that coming up. Stay with us. But WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.